everyone. Welcome back to Screen Review. My name is Megan.
And I'm Dina. If you enjoy the show and find it valuable, please click the share button to share the stream with all of your friends. And also, don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe to the Boca Raton Tribune on all social media platforms. YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search up at Boca Tribune.
All right, so without further ado, today we're going to be reviewing Portrait of a Lady on Fire. It's a 2019 film. It is rated R. It's about 2 hours long, and you can find it on Hulu. So normally we give like a little spoiler-free kind of review, but just for this one, we're going to give our overall thoughts of the movie before jumping down into, what exactly happens. So Dina, what did you think about the movie overall?
I enjoyed the movie. I did think it was a little slow, I will not lie. I didn't really not necessarily understand, but didn't really appreciate the movie as a whole until the last 5 to 10 minutes, truly. But it was a very pretty movie to look at, as I like to say that, when with colors and, costumes were really pretty. I love the whole aspect of the main character being an artist. It was very nice to watch her sketch and her mind at work, but overall didn't really captivate. I wasn't really captivated until the end.
Yeah, I agree. It's not a very exciting movie, I would say. There's no action, nothing crazy happens. You could say that. I will go ahead and mention that the entire movie is in French. It is subtitled. Mention that. But I liked how it took place. It was kind of like a period piece. Took place in 1770. It was interesting, like you said, with the costumes and everything. And definitely the cinematography. A lot of it took place kind of on a beach almost. And I like the way they kind of I almost want to say they put a filter over that kind of thing. Over the scene.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it looked really nice, the way that everything kind of was filtered, we'll say. Looked nice. I agree, though. Kind of slow, but it was engaging, definitely towards the end. I would say, kind of like how Uncut Gems, you had to stick through it to have it be a good movie.
Yeah, for sure.
I would say it was kind of like that.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Do you have anything else to say about that?
Not really. Just kind of overall thoughts. So I guess now we'll just kind of jump into the actual movie.
Yeah. So we kind of start the movie in a art class of sorts, a live drawing art class, where we see Marianne as the teacher as well as the muse, kind of teaching all these little kids how to draw. And they ask what's this painting in the back, and she says it's a portrait of a lady on fire, and she acts all offended that they took it out of the back of the closet, why would you show this to me again? And then we kind of, our next scene, we see Marianne going to this house, I'm assuming to see wherever she saw this portrait, wherever she originally painted this portrait, right?
Yeah, definitely. So, yeah, you see her go to this remote island, and then there she kind of is introduced to the idea of why she's there. Essentially, what she's supposed to do is she's been commissioned to paint a wedding portrait of this girl that lives there. Her name is Heloise, and she was to commission this wedding portrait of her. But the thing is that she cannot let Heloise know that's why she's there. She must do it in secret. So essentially, she'll have to look at her, memorize her, and then go back at night or, whenever she gets alone time and paint her. So I think that alone is just a very difficult task, to have to paint a portrait of someone without ever, really actually seeing them pose or do anything. So it seemed a little difficult of a task at first.
The reason that Marianne, which is the painter, the main character, the reason Marianne had to kind of observe her like this is because Heloise would never sit down for a portrait. There was a painter before her who was commissioned, who had to leave because he left on his own because she was so frustrating Heloise to paint. And so Heloise's mother, in order to get her to do this, kind of told Marianne to be an observer while Heloise goes on walks, because basically Heloise's mother doesn't want Heloise to go on walks alone because Heloise's older sister recently killed herself by jumping off a cliff on a walk. So it's already a damaged family that's kind of mourning over this oldest sibling.
Definitely. And, throughout your first meetings of Heloise, you can kind of see this almost stoic, emotionless person because she's gone through this thing. You don't see her smile until 30, 45 minutes into the movie, I want to say. It's pretty far into the movie. I could be wrong on the timing. I didn't check. But other than that, I mean, yeah. So essentially, they first meet, you know, going on this walk, and Marianne, you know, asked around. She asked, you know, the house servant, you know, oh, what's Heloise like? And so now she gets to meet her. And their first meetings are pretty silent on these walks. There's not much conversation going on. It's kind of awkward almost. You know, I guess when you meet someone new, it's almost awkward. But I think what was interesting during their first meeting is that Heloise immediately broke out into like a sprint toward the cliff. And so Marianne, having heard that, you know, Heloise's older sister just killed herself by jumping off a cliff, this scared her because going on a first walk, she's sprinting toward the cliff. So kind of an interesting first meeting, I would say.
For sure. And I would say after those first after that first meeting, the rest of them were, as you said, kind of silent, kind of, I wouldn't say boring, but boring. I think the main like captivating part about that was when you would see Marianne like sketch quickly like what Heloise looked like. There was this one scene they were going up the stairs and kind of you never really saw Heloise's face head on, like you never saw her, so you kind of heard Marianne's inner dialogue kind of like analyze the back of her ear and the top of her cheeks because she kind of turned to the side a little bit, and it was so interesting to hear it from like an artist's perspective. It was very like I don't know, it's a very nice thing to hear, I guess you could say, like how an artist analyzes a person.
Yeah, I agree, because she was kind of like almost planning in her head, you know, okay, like make sure to make this stand out or make sure to have this look a certain way, kind of like talking herself through it for what she would be doing later. It was definitely interesting.
Yeah.
So I guess, again, like the beginning of the movie and pretty much the entire movie is very slow, so we're going to be skipping around kind of quickly. So I would I guess the next important part, at least what I thought, would be the debut of this first painting, because at this point, you know, Marianne is finished through these secret observations of Heloise. And so she tells Heloise's mother, like, okay, like, I finished the portrait, and the mother obviously wants to see it, but Marianne says, no, like, let me show Heloise first. And so then she shows Heloise this painting, and immediately she kind of says, oh, is this what you think I look like? Like, what, you know, what is this? So, exactly. So this kind of leads to a little bit of a conflict between the two. You know, Marianne is obviously offended because she had to do such a difficult job of painting someone who refused to pose, and now this person is turning around and insulting it almost.
Right. And so immediately after that, Marianne does like destroy the painting. She like wipes her hand across the face. So Heloise's mother is like, you're dismissed. Like, this was a perfect painting and you ruined it. And to that, Heloise, you kind of see this like glimmer of fear, I guess, in her eyes. And she's like, oh, wait, I want Marianne to leave. So she says, wait, never mind. Like, I'll pose for her this time. So she begins posing for her. And I will say, before this destroying scene, there was kind of this scene between Heloise and Marianne where they sat at a piano, and Marianne was like playing this like song about a storm or something like that, and she didn't really know like the whole song. She kind of messed up near the end while she's playing on the piano. And so Marianne kind of says to Heloise, like, oh, don't worry, you'll hear this song in Milan. And that kind of triggered Heloise because basically she's getting married off to some man in Milan that she just has no idea who he is, like, what he is, whatever. Keep in mind, aristocracy, they kind of get married, high families, all that. So she was very upset about that. But anyways, after that, she decides to pose actually for Marianne. So,
exactly. Yeah, so through these kind of, you know, posing sessions, because I mean, obviously in 1770 France or really anywhere else, when you're posing for a painting, I mean, you're stuck in that seat, in that position for hours on end. Pretty much, I guess, I'm assuming as long as daylight lasts, to be honest.
Right.
So through this time, you know, Marianne and Heloise are having this conversation about, you know, little observations they've made of one another, which is definitely interesting because you'd think that, you know, as the artist, you know, they kind of memorize who they're painting because, you know, they're staring at them, they're painting them, they're doing all of this. But what's interesting is that Heloise reciprocates that, and she's memorized little things of Marianne in return, which is interesting. I read a little article that said, you know, this movie redefines the artist and muse kind of dynamic, and you start to see that in this scene for sure.
Right. And it was very interesting to see how they observed them. Again, as I said earlier, this like artist perspective on like the human body, I guess. I loved it, and how she talked about like how her skin tone was like really nice that day. It was very interesting to like hear again from an artist's perspective. And so basically after this, while Heloise agrees to pose for her, they kind of bond more. They play card games together, whatnot. They read stories together. And then there's this story that's kind of like a huge plot point, I guess. Not huge, but kind
It's
of
pretty big.
you hear about it again and again, called, I can't pronounce it, Megan.
I got you.
What is it called?
Orpheus and Eurydice. Don't roast
Right.
me if I'm wrong. I'm doing my best.
That one, the Greek mythology, although I'm not as well versed in that classical knowledge, I can say that it does kind of, you hear about the story now and again, hear about not just the story, but the book itself now and again throughout the movie. So the first time you hear it is kind of like this bonding moment between, this kind of like fun moment, I guess, between Heloise and Marion, as well as like this other servant girl who lives in the house with them.
Yeah. So I think it's interesting because, they all read the book together and they all interpret the ending a little bit differently. And it kind of shows, how they interpret love differently, each of them. So it's another kind of important thing. And definitely throughout, I mean, if you've read this, then you would probably get it a little bit more than we did, who just kind of did a quick little search on what the story was about. It parallels the movie towards the end more so, I would say, than the beginning. So it was definitely interesting. And I guess the next notable scene would be when they all went to this kind of fire ceremony type thing. Because at this point in the movie, Sophie, the servant, is struggling with an unwanted pregnancy. And, 1770 France, she's unmarried, she's young, so she's just kind of dealing with it and trying to remedy the situation, we'll say. And so they all go to this kind of fire ceremony thing. I don't really know.
It was like, I think it was honestly just like a bonfire, and it was just like all these women who like worked at like, I guess, like the clinic of sorts, you could say. And it was just like, it was very like feminine moment, I guess. You could say.
Definitely.
So there was like a lot of, at this bonfire, there was like a lot of drinking and singing, and we hear throughout the movie that Heloise loves like music, and that was one of the things that like they were trying to convince her to go to Milan to meet this husband for, is because she loves music and art and all that. So they're all singing, they're drinking, they're at this bonfire, and then you kind of see the scene where Heloise herself is like on fire.
Yeah, which was her dress caught fire or something to the actual bonfire itself.
Yeah, which is kind of the scene where kind of, I guess, when you hear about the past, when Heloise's older sister killed herself, it was kind of this moment where when Marianne turned to see Heloise on fire and Heloise not really caring, she was just kind of walking like, oh, look, I'm on fire, and then fell. And Marianne ran to her. It's kind of this like very beautiful, honestly, I thought, scene of where you see them like holding hands and like holding each other throughout the movie, kind of like a montage, I guess, of them holding each other. And so I thought it was like very pretty to watch scene. For sure.
I definitely agree. And now that you mention it, you are right. I mean, I guess it could parallel what happened to her sister, because the Sophie, the servant of the house, and the older sister were going on a walk together, and that's when the sister killed herself. And everyone asked Sophie, oh, how did you know that she killed herself and didn't just fall? And it's because she didn't cry out, is what she said. And so you can kind of parallel that, because Heloise just stood there and just let herself burn, essentially.
And Marianne kind of, I guess, was scared that she would lose Heloise in that moment, I would say.
You could say, definitely. Yeah, and I would say, like you were saying earlier, their connection is definitely through music. And just in general, because it's one of the things that Heloise loves. I mean, you first see Heloise smile, like a real nice, genuine smile, is when, at the piano scene, I think. It's like one of the first times, if not the first, one of the first.
Right, for sure. So you can kind of see her love for music. And she mentions how, earlier in the movie, she mentions how she wants to join a church just because she wants to hear music.
So, yeah, she was at the convent before. So I think so I mean, I guess that's kind of her past, and that's why. I don't know.
Yeah, whatever. She just truly enjoys art, which makes sense. At the time in France, it was like artistry was like a huge thing. Anyway, so after this like kind of near-death experience for Heloise, I guess it's kind of a lot of love between Heloise and Marianne, and you kind of see their relationship blossom. And that kind of like leads us to the last 10 minutes that we keep talking about, where it was like actually genuinely interesting. No, the whole movie is interesting. That was so mean. I'm sorry.
It was actually good.
No, the whole movie was good, but like the part that like captivated you and like made you realize like why you watched the movie, you know? It was kind of this scene where Marianne has all of these pictures that she's drawn of Heloise, and Heloise is like, well, after a while, you'll only see her as meaning like the person in the picture and not me. Because if you remember earlier in the movie, Heloise complained about how Marianne truly sees her in that first photo, in that first portrait that she destroyed. So from that, Marianne is like, okay, I'll draw a self-portrait of myself for you. So she does on page 28 of this story, the Orpheus and Eurydice's. So specifically on page 28 of that book, she draws a self-portrait of herself, Marianne, for Heloise. Yes.
Yeah, and so I think this is pretty much one of the last nights they have together, because I'm not sure if we mentioned it, but the mother was out of town throughout this whole time, like during the whole like love montage, the 45 minutes of them being in love, essentially. So throughout the whole time, the mother's not there, so she's returning the next day to come, first of all, get, look at the portrait and get it sent out to the husband, or the fiance, I suppose. And then, that's it. Then Marianne is essentially going to leave, because that's, she finished what she came to do. So this is essentially their last night together, and then they'll be, ripped apart. How sad. they'll be taken apart from one another, because Heloise kind of refuses to stand up against her mother and say, no, I don't want to be married, because I guess at that time you can't do anything about it. Essentially,
it was just the way of life. I mean, you mentioned to me, Megan, how it's kind of it was at a time where a woman being married was a huge thing, and Marianne herself never wanted to get married. She was a painter, which at the time was kind of like, if you think about France at the time, being a painter then was like being a woman working in a factory. You know what I mean? It wasn't a job for a woman necessarily. So, she was going to take over her father's painting business, not really something conventionally a woman in 1770s France would do. And that kind of is like, is the opposite, I guess, juxtaposes kind of Heloise's, like high society life of having to be married off and money and,
definitely
lovers, you could say.
Yeah, you could say. I mean, that's definitely what it was. By the end of it, you're right. It was going to be near impossible for them to be together. You're right, because their lives just so juxtaposed to one another. That would be. I mean, it was also 1770s France. I don't think this is exactly a thing that was, smiled upon. We'll say.
Yeah. Exactly.
So by the end of it, I know that you really like the final scenes of, Heloise getting fitted in her wedding gown and stuff. So I'll let you go ahead and explain that.
So basically, this is again when I was truly captivated, was kind of Heloise is getting fit into her wedding gown, but we don't see it. And as Marianne leaves the house, Heloise says, turn around, and you kind of, for a split second, like not even, you see Heloise in her wedding dress and a door closed, or like the screen goes black. And so I thought that was very interesting, because it kind of parallels the Orpheus and Eurydice.
You got
that
it.
One book where basically Orpheus, right? He goes to the underworld, I guess, to save his lover or whatever, and they say, don't look at her while you're there, or else she'll be gone forever. And he does look at her while she's there, and he does kind of lose her forever. So that parallels in the sense that Marianne turns around to look at Heloise in her wedding dress, and that's when she loses her, obviously, because Heloise is getting married and they're kind of being separated. And so a little while later, you want to say something? Sorry.
Yeah, I do actually. Sorry. I do want to say that, not only does this scene parallel the Orpheus and Eurydice kind of story, but it also parallels the beginning of the movie, to where Marianne and Heloise first meet one another, where Heloise is facing, her back is facing Marianne, and then she opens the door, from the dark into the light, and goes out, and they go on their walk together. She breaks out into the run, whatever. And then at the end, it's Marianne walking out the door and Heloise behind her.
I didn't even notice that, but yeah.
Yeah, it could be that parallel as well. So there's just multiple things. I think it was very intentional the way they chose to kind of introduce them leaving one another.
For sure. But then after that, it's like a few years later, you see Marianne at this art show, art gallery thing. Basically, she has a painting in this art gallery. She wants to show off her painting, or she wants to see people's reactions to her painting. But she put it under her father's name because, again, a female painter in an art gallery wouldn't get, the recognition deserves. And I know, Megan, you have a good point from that scene.
Yes, I do.
You want to mention
So,
it?
I got you. Yeah, no worries. So essentially what happens is that Marianne is standing in front of all these paintings that she painted, but they're underneath her father's name. She submitted them under his name. And so this guy comes up and says, like, wow, like, what beautiful paintings. Your dad is so talented. Like, you're so lucky. And then she confides in this guy and says, oh, actually, like, these are my paintings. I just put them under his name. And immediately he turns around and starts critiquing them, which is just so interesting. And it shows, again, women's role in France in 1770 at this time and how difficult it's going to be for her. I mean, she's planning on taking over her father's business in general. So I don't know, honestly, what will happen in the future with that, because as soon as he found out that it was a woman who did this instead, immediately, even to her face, was critiquing them and saying, like, oh, I don't know if this placement's right. Like, people don't normally do this. It was just interesting, I think.
Yeah. And so, yeah, that was a very interesting moment to think about. But then after that, she you see her run through the gallery. She's like looking at, I guess, like a pamphlet or whatever. What is it? A brochure of the paintings in the gallery. And you see her run through the gallery, noticing something. And you see this painting of Heloise with a small child, assumingly hers. Not actually that small. It's like a toddler, I would say. Yeah. And if you look up close to the painting, you see Heloise is posing with a book in her hand. And the book in her hand happens to be that Orpheus and
Eurydice
book, and where you can see her finger, and like she's kind of like opening the book a little bit to page 28, which is the page that Marianne drew her self-portrait on. So it was like a nice moment, and Marianne like really felt it in her heart. And so then they saw each other again one last time, but again, Heloise did not see Marianne, but Marianne saw Heloise, where they went to the theater. I'm not really sure what show it was, but
I don't know.
It was like a theater or something. They're both like in those like box seats on the side, and from a distance, from the other side of the theater, Marianne spots Heloise, but Heloise again did not see Marianne, and that was like a scene that I loved the most about the entire movie. It was the song about the storm that Marianne was playing earlier on the piano, and that was like playing at the theater, and you kind of just keep getting this close-up of Heloise crying, and she's just like continuously, her crying is getting more and more. It starts from a tear down her eye to like a full-blown sobbing, and like she can't breathe, and like it's just like a very emotional moment. Like she's crying to this song because I'm assuming she remembers Marianne, but she doesn't even know that Marianne is sitting there watching her cry to it. So I thought it was like a very, and that was the end of the movie.
Yeah, exactly. It just ended right after that. And I thought it was also interesting because, I mean, this scene, it's like a good 30 seconds to like a minute and a half long of just like camera angle just on Heloise's face. You're just watching her cry, essentially. And it was interesting. I read a few articles after this, watching the movie, because I was interested to learn more. And a lot of people said that the director did that intentionally to allow the audience to reflect with Heloise on their relationship. Whether or not the audience actually did it or not, I don't know. It's your decision to do or not. But that's essentially kind of why it was there, to show like from, Marianne's perspective, you're watching Heloise do this and we're all reflecting together, essentially.
I definitely reflected. That scene was really emotional.
It was really good. Yeah.
Right. I agree.
So I guess plot-wise, I mean, we obviously left out a few things. Sophie has an entire little separate storyline that we didn't really get into at all. The mother has a few things we didn't get into at all. There's like little things we didn't touch on, but overall, I think that's everything that I have.
It's everything that I have as well.
Yeah. So I guess just let us know what you think of the movie, if you like it or not. If you haven't watched it yet, watch it. It was good. It was good.
Yeah. It was a good
movie. I'm not going to give it any, glowing reviews, but I enjoyed it. It was fine. Yeah. It was fine. It was good.
And don't forget to follow and subscribe to the Boca Raton Tribune on all social media, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Boca Tribune. And if you did enjoy this show, hopefully you did, please click the share button and share the stream with all of your friends.
Yeah, definitely. And then we'll see you guys here next week. We're going to be watching Sorry to Bother You.
Yep.
Right. Bye.